Hey, my name is Melanie Gertis. I'm the licensed counselor for Victoria College, and we have Midcoast Family Services here, and it's Larsen with them, and she's going to do a presentation on mental health in times of uncertainty.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So yes, I am Larsen from Midcoast Family Services, and this is Bella. I'm sorry that she is insisting on being with me for the presentation. Hopefully, she's not too distracting. But yes, today I'll be talking about mental health and some of the strategies that we can use to better our mental health, as well as relieve stress and unwanted feelings when those occur in our lives. So just a little bit about Midcoast. We are a nonprofit located here in Victoria. Our mission is to empower children, individuals, and families to live a life free from family violence, homelessness, sexual assault, and substance abuse. Some of our services include the Women's Crisis Center, sexual assault, housing and rental assistance, our youth services, which is where I work, and also it includes the youth department and our Phase Family Services, and then our thrift stores. So I want to start out by saying that mental health issues are completely normal and valid. Actually, most people will be diagnosed with some sort of mental illness or disorder at some point in their lives. Over 50% of people will. And this could be temporary, it could be a chronic ongoing issue, but at some point, most people will be diagnosed with some sort of mental illness or disorder. So then some common mental health issues include anxiety, depression, PTSD, and eating disorders. So obviously there are a lot more than this, but these are just 4 common ones. And you'll see as I list some of the symptoms to look out for if you're thinking that someone is suffering from a mental health issue. All of the symptoms are together, and that is because some of the symptoms fall under symptoms of more than one of these and don't just relate to one of them, but you can kind of see which ones would relate to which. So mental health during COVID. So actually, just from spring 2019 to spring 2020, anxiety increased from 8.1% to 25.5%, which is a huge increase. And of course, this is due to sickness, isolation, loss of our social activities, use of unhealthy coping strategies, and then the new expectations, that we had to get used to post-COVID now, but especially back in 2020, how life was when COVID was first starting. So some of the signs of mental health issues. So these obviously, someone suffering can have one of these, they can have all of them, they can have any combination of these. So those include excessive worry or sadness, trouble concentrating, extreme mood changes, irritability or anger, isolation, changes in sleeping patterns, changes in eating patterns, using substances like alcohol, drugs, tobacco, marijuana, physical issues, suicidal thoughts, an inability to handle stress and responsibilities, nightmares, concern with how one looks, and changes in grades. Obviously, that one is only relevant to students. So what are the causes of mental illnesses? So obviously, any person could have more than one of these listed, or they could only have one, or it could be due to something else. But some common causes of mental illness include childhood trauma, chronic health conditions, chemical imbalances and genetics, drugs and alcohol, and then isolation. So I really like this chart here and how it shows kind of the spectrum of mental illness and mental state and how it changes. So going down the list, it gets more severe. So we start out with mental well-being. That's when someone is totally comfortable and they don't really have any issues that need to be addressed. And then we move down to mental distress. And that is just sort of a unpleasant emotion that is being had, sad, angry, worried. And usually when this happens, professionals recommend that they just take time to let those feelings go away naturally, and talk to friends, talk to family, Even when you aren't talking about what's stressing you out, or you're not talking about the negative feeling that you're feeling, even just talking to friends and family or being around them can make people feel better. And then moving down to mental health problems. This is an even stronger emotion or a reaction to something that has happened in their life. This can include things like grieving, for example. And they recommend that that person should reach out to someone that this is obviously meant for high schoolers, but they can reach out to someone who is a professional or someone who they trust talking to. And then lastly, mental illness. So this is when it's diagnosable, depression, anxiety, all of those. And this is when they need professional help. I'm so sorry, my cat is being a huge distraction over here. And then obviously treatment for mental illness is going to depend on how severe the mental illness is. But things like therapy, medication, social support, education, and hospitalization are all options. Sometimes people don't have any of these, and sometimes people have all of these. Again, it's really just going to depend on the person and what their healthcare team recommends. So then some habits that promote good mental health. Obviously eating well, so eating enough and not overeating. Talking to a friend, good sleep, having healthy habits every day, exercise, studying, being safe, positive self-talk, meditation, asking for help, setting boundaries, and then things like to-do lists even can help us. So then habits that hurt mental health. Alcohol, tobacco, drugs, self-harm, isolation, and avoiding responsibilities. So sleep and mental health. Sleep and mental health are very heavily intertwined. When we're really stressed, it is going to prevent us from getting a full night's rest. And if you don't have a great routine before bed, you should implement one because it can help us calm down at night and get better sleep. This can include writing any worried thought in a journal before bed so that you can transfer the focus of that stress, get it out of your brain, put it on paper, and of course, disconnecting from devices can help us sleep better. So then I really liked this kind of circle of how sleep and mental health are related. So, if we start out with feelings of worry or stress, this is going to lead to us being up all night, worried about whatever it is, and lack of sleep. And then tiredness during the day is going to lead to difficulty just completing our daily tasks, coping with daily life. And that is going to lead to low self-esteem, which will again lead to feelings of worry or stress. And the cycle just continues and continues as sleep and mental health affect each other back and forth. So mental health and medication. So as we know, a physician might prescribe a medication if it's appropriate. And obviously this is going to depend on that person's specific health needs, which is why you should never take a medication that wasn't prescribed for you. And this is especially true for any medications that were prescribed for mental illnesses. So then there are effects that can happen if someone takes a prescription medication that wasn't meant for them and their body doesn't need. And this can include tolerance, physical dependence, sensitivity to pain, health, like physical symptoms. So then if someone is suffering or if they need help right away, obviously talking to someone and finding resources is a great place to start, making an appointment. But if it's an emergency, treat it like you would a physical health emergency, like an accident, or if someone were to break their leg, you would treat it the same way. That is a mental health emergency is an emergency. Going to the emergency room or calling 911 is totally appropriate. So there often is a stigma attached to mental health disorders. You don't need to feel ashamed for something that you can't control. And obviously resources are available for anyone who needs those resources. Okay, I'm just going to take a sip of water before we switch gears here. Okay, so coping mechanisms. or coping skills, depending on which term you've heard, are activities and skills that can help us cope with stressful situations and unwanted feelings. And obviously, these are personalized. A coping skill that works for one person might not work for another person, but they help us calm down and respond appropriately to the stressors in our lives, and they can prevent stress in the future if we have them as habits. So just think about what stressors you face. I can't see the chat, but you can put them in there if you want. But you might have stressors about your personal life, whether it's friends or relationships. You might have stressors relating to work or school. You might have stressors relating to the state of the world. Really, the stressors are personal, and how you respond to them is something in your control, which we're going to talk about now. So some unhealthy coping mechanisms that a lot of people tend to turn towards includes alcohol, marijuana, and smoking or vaping. And of course, we know, hopefully, all of the negative effects of these things. Like alcohol can lead to worsened anxiety and depression, which obviously is just going to add to the stress. And then marijuana, of course, is related to grades decreasing, which is just going to add more stress. And then smoking, of course, is just the #1 preventable cause of death. So it's really not a great thing to do. So some other unhealthy coping mechanisms include people eating too much or eating too little. People fighting, whether it's like physical or emotional. Obviously, this is going to lead to someone being hurt, whether yourself or others. A lot of people will turn to self-harm as a coping mechanism, and this is going to result in physical injury. And then reckless spending. So people will buy things that they don't need in order to feel temporarily better. So then some healthy coping mechanisms. Of course, this includes sleep, exercise, eating enough food, relaxation techniques. There are 2 that I really love. There's a video that I'm going to show that's going to show 2 examples of some relaxation techniques. Taking a break, whether this is taking a break from being around people, taking a break from social media, taking a break from work, taking a break from school. Good communication, talking to someone that you trust, planning, journaling, surrounding yourself with good friends, and then being aware of your needs and feelings. So the more in tune we are with ourselves, the more we will know when we're stressed out, and we can start to implement our healthy coping mechanisms. So obviously these are really similar to the habits that promote good mental health because they're kind of the same thing. So short-term versus long-term stress relief. So things that will relieve stress in the short term, they will provide, stress relief right away, but they might not be as effective in the long run. So things that we want to avoid altogether: drinking alcohol and doing drugs, even if we think that they're going to relieve our stress temporarily and quickly, we should just avoid them in general. But some short-term stress relief that we should implement, the relaxation strategies, and then removing yourself from the stressful situation. So obviously removing yourself from the stressful situation isn't going to make it where the situation never happens again, but it will help in the short term relieve some of that stress. So then long-term stress relief, it sets up those healthy habits that will reduce the stress in the long run. So like quality sleep, drinking enough water and eating enough food, having a good support system, practicing mindfulness and gratitude, and then having some sort of activity that you can participate in regularly and daily and something that you enjoy. If you can combine short-term and long-term stress relief strategies for anything that stresses you out, try to have one of each so that you are relieved of the stress right away, but also have that long-term stress relief too. So then another way to look at coping strategies is emotion-focused versus problem-focused. So emotion-focused coping strategies is when you are dealing with an emotion associated with a stressor. So this is usually for situations that you can't change or solve. But then problem-focused, on the other hand, is for situations where you can control or problem solve to get rid of the stressor altogether. And I'll show an example of both of these. But if you can do both of them, we usually do need to relieve that stress from the negative emotion, as well as fix the problem that's causing the stress. I hope that makes sense. So for example, emotion-focused coping skills, things like exercising, taking a bath, giving yourself a pep talk, meditating, kind of these self-care things are going to relieve the negative emotions that we have because of the stress in our lives. But then things like working on time management, asking for support, having healthy boundaries, and creating to-do lists, those will actually get rid of the problem altogether, or at least reduce the problem. So if we can have one of each of these incorporated into our stress relief routine, it would be really good for our mental health. So some things to consider when we're thinking about what kind of coping strategies we have for our mental health. What stresses you out more? So the example I like to use is that some people love journaling, and journaling helps them de-stress. It helps them calm down and go to sleep at the end of the day. It helps them figure out what they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. But then other people, they try to journal and it just stresses them out more because they write a word incorrectly and they have to cross it out or erase it. And journaling for some people is more stressful. So if you're using a coping strategy for your mental health that stresses you out more, it's time to find a new coping strategy. And then being alone or being around people. So when someone goes through something stressful, or if they're just not feeling great, some people like to be alone, and then other people like to be around their friends and family. They like to be distracted while they cope with those negative emotions. So really knowing which person you are, and if you like to be alone or if you like to be around other people. It is proven that being around people can help you feel better, but a lot of people do need that initial, time alone before they go and be with friends and family when they're stressed out. So what unhealthy coping skill can you replace with a healthy one? So if you currently smoke cigarettes or drink to relieve stress, what can you replace that with as a healthy coping mechanism? Can you replace that with going on a walk or learning to cook a new recipe? So I want to show this little video. It's really great. It just kind of talks about coping skills and some short-term ways to relieve that stress. It talks about those 2 relaxation techniques.
We all have to deal with stress. Whether our life is being threatened in a disaster or we're just late for an important meeting, we need mechanisms to cope with all types of stress. It is commonly said that life is not what happens to us, but how we choose to react to what happens to us. Today, we're going to talk about healthy versus unhealthy coping mechanisms and how you can use these strategies to help yourself or share them to help others. Welcome to Mental Health Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating our community in mental health literacy. We believe that a foundational education about mental health promotion and understanding mental health and mental illness will lead to more resilient communities and decreased stigma. We believe that mental health literacy is a right and need of everyone. Thank you for joining us. When we are faced with too much stress or are having difficulty dealing with stress, using healthy coping mechanisms can allow us to feel in control, calm, and ready to handle whatever is causing us stress. On the other hand, relying on unhealthy coping mechanisms may work in the short term, but ultimately may end up hurting our physical health, mental health, and even our relationships. Here are some of the healthy ways we can cope with stress. Box breathing is when we breathe in for 4 seconds, hold our breath for 4 seconds, then breathe out for 4 seconds, and hold our breath for 4 seconds. Repeating this several times. This technique slows down our breathing, which forces our heart to slow and activates the calming response in our body. Another technique, called 5-4-3-2-1, is in our heads, we list 5 things we see, 4 things we feel, 3 things we hear, 2 things we smell, and 1 thing that we taste. This technique helps ground us in the present moment and can slow down racing thoughts. Exercise of any type is another healthy coping mechanism. Exercise floods the body with endorphins and can help use up the adrenaline released from stress, clearing our heads and allowing us to feel calmer. Sometimes we are so overwhelmed with stress that we don't even realize how awful we feel. Writing down our feelings to acknowledge them and then making a plan to problem solve can help us tune into our thoughts and feelings and figure out an action plan. Taking a break from technology can help us to focus on our immediate surroundings, tune into how we are feeling, and connect live with others. Leaning on our relationships, talking about what is stressing us out, and asking for help are some of the best ways to cope with stress. It can be difficult to admit that we are struggling, but once we tell someone, we almost always feel better. Spending time with friends and family, even if we don't talk about our stress, can help us feel calmer and less overwhelmed by our circumstances. Gratitude is another helpful way to combat stress. When something is upsetting to us, it can help to be grateful for what is good in our lives. Doing an act of kindness can reduce stress as well. Acts of kindness flood our bodies with feel-good hormones, increase our sense of connectedness and purpose, and help us focus on problems other than our own. Here are some unhealthy coping mechanisms to watch out for and avoid. Alcohol and other substances can be used to dull or numb the pain of stress, but this effect is temporary, does not resolve the problem, harms us if we do it too much, and can become an addiction. Similarly, overeating or undereating creates an unhealthy relationship with food, can harm us by starving or overfilling our body and creating additional emotional stress. It fails to address what is actually stressing us out. Avoiding the problem by using social media, work, television, sleep, or other distractions can work to prevent us from thinking about our stress, but it does not resolve the stress. Social withdrawal and aggression are also unhealthy ways to cope with stress. We may withdraw if we are overwhelmed and do not have the energy to interact with others. However, interacting with others almost always helps relieve our stress. On the other hand, taking our stress out as aggression or aggravation toward others may leave our loved ones hurt and confused, and may leave us feeling guilty about how we treated them. Finally, self-harm is a dangerous way to cope with stress. If you or someone you know self-harms, please seek professional help immediately. Remember, we all face stress and difficulties in life. Using healthy coping mechanisms helps us deal with our stress in active, beneficial ways. There are always ways to problem solve and strategize, no matter what our stress may be. If you or someone you know is struggling to cope, see the resources below for how to get help. We hope you found this information helpful. We at Mental Health Collaborative are committed to providing education and increasing awareness about all of the interrelated states of mental health.
All right, so these are some of my resources where I found information. I know that I tend to talk really fast during presentations, so hopefully everything came across clearly. If you want me to go back to any slide to reference, I can. If not, I just want to open it up for any questions, if anyone has any questions.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now.